Hello, welcome to today's broadcast. I'm going to be talking about hydroxychloroquine and looking at an article which goes through some of the evidence for and against. In other words, critiques some of the motivations that Trump might have in touting this anti-malaria drug as a cure or preventative measure for contracting the disease or preventing it degenerating into a more serious condition. So let's have a look. This is an article published by The Guardian. Let's have a look at its title. The title is Trump touted hydroxychloroquine as a cure for COVID-19. Don't believe the hype. So I'm scrolling down past the fact that, yes, Trump interrupted Dr. Fauci, didn't allow him to answer questions about it at the press conference today. It's often known by its brand name Plaquenil, a drug used to treat malaria. It is a less toxic version of chloroquine, another malaria drug, which itself is related to quinine. Oh, Pumpkin, do not walk in front of the screen. Hang on, I can... Do you really need to go that way? No. Okay. All right. We have some comments already. Let's see if I can respond to the comments. Hello, good morning, Paul and Kat. Thanks for joining me. So yes, what I really want to communicate to people is that the French scientist who has worked on the initial trial, Dr. Didier Raoult, has been accused of falsifying data in previous studies, copy and pasting photographs. Some people say, yes, that his institution has been accused of being run in a very authoritarian fashion, and accusations of sexual harassment have been inadequately dealt with. And also that Dr. Didier Raoult has a partner who is a lawyer who promoted this study that he conducted in France to Fox News as a way to get Donald Trump's attention. Trump might suffer from something. I mean, all psychiatric conditions to a degree are arbitrary. Not that psychiatrists would like that opinion, but still. There's a condition called oppositional defiance disorder, ODD, and people that have it or are diagnosed with it just like running in opposition to things. They're attracted to being oppositional. So their psychological constitution, as it were, is just gears them towards doing things like what Trump is doing now, which is saying, yes, this drug is great. I would put that in the broader context of a fascist style of governance when you construct an alternate reality for people to meet their emotional needs of wanting to feel special, to be part of a group, to have goals that are larger than themselves, and to just be uniformly positive about their country and their prospects. So Trump has met the emotional needs of people who are willing to suspend their belief in normal channels of gathering and processing information, i.e. watching the news and comparing it to other sources of information in a rational way. Trump has rendered a large subsection of the American public irrational by telling them, like many other fascist leaders have done before him, that the press is lying. He repeats this message often. He derides CNN as fake news. He derides all mainstream media sources and outlets as being fake news. Hitler had a term for it. It was Lügenpresse, meaning lying press, and other authoritarian leaders are famous for doing this as well. It's a fascist technique that works well. So it shouldn't be too surprising that Trump's adopted it. He's a criminal lowlife who found an opportunity to take his crimes big picture, to grift at a scale that he previously hadn't been able to dream of. And everybody around the world is suffering as a consequence. There's been a lot of failures of leadership around the world, but Trump's failures of leadership, abrogation of duty, dereliction of duty, however you would characterize it, that's definitely been inspirational in a negative way to world leaders. So the president of China is also an aspiring dictator, totalitarian, fascist-style leader who has the same techniques of governing for optics, which means you don't address problems until you have to. You don't act proactively. You seek to deny things that might cause people to question your leadership. But nevertheless, he still, once the problem was beyond his ability to hush up, he at least gave up on trying to lie to the Chinese public and to the world to a degree. So I think the Washington Post published details suggesting that President Xi had lied about the fatalities in China by a factor of potentially 16. So there may have been over 40,000 deaths in China when the world was told there had been approximately 2,000. Yes, so that's very wrong and compounds the problem that the world is facing if they were working with insufficient information, inadequate information. But yes, Trump's failure to declare a national lockdown, failure to use the the Defense Production Act of 1950, which allows a president to coordinate supplies, to direct companies to begin manufacturing things that are needed in a wartime or another crisis of national significance. Trump instead is leaving states to bid against each other, to fend for themselves, and is telling people it's because I'm such a strong believer in the Constitution. And in the meantime, please hoard this supply of this malaria drug, which people who have lupus need. Hi, Craig. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hi, Brian. If you want to join in, Brian, let me know, and you can chat online as well, which we always enjoy. Let's have a look. I'm still here with the Guardian article. I'll return to it. Are there any downsides to this drug being in demand? Yes, potential side effects of hydroxychloroquine include headaches, dizziness, stomach pain, weight loss, and mood changes, but potentially also heart damage, liver damage, kidney damage. So that's just my addition. I'm not reading that from the article. I wonder why the article doesn't mention that. In any case, it does mention the fact that a sudden surge in demand for hydroxychloroquine risks shortages of the drug for those who need it most. Hydroxychloroquine is able to keep lupus, which is a chronic autoimmune disease, in check. But some people with the condition have complained that they are now unable to find Plaquenil. Plaquenil? Brian might know how to pronounce it. Actually, he's very likely to know how to pronounce it. Trump's pushing of the treatment has caused many Americans, whether they need it or not. Well, no, nobody needs it, Guardian journalist. Nobody needs it for coronavirus. But maybe, okay, the implication is a little vague. Trump's pushing of the treatment has caused many Americans who don't need it to stock up on the drug. The latest Chinese research suggests that using hydroxychloroquine is no better than conventional coronavirus treatments such as bed rest, antiviral drugs, and oxygen inhalation. So yes, I mean, some of the antiviral drug research is worth getting more excited about than hydroxychloroquine. When there's been a randomized controlled trial of hydroxychloroquine that brought up the result of no efficacy whatsoever. Plaquenil. Okay. Oh, Brian said yes to joining in. I will send him the link. And we can chat. But if you're tired, don't oops, nope, that's the wrong link. Okay, try again. Thanks for bearing with me, everyone. There's the link for Brian. Okay. All right. So one thing I wish to impress upon people is that under fascism, you have realities that diverge, and pretending that hydroxychloroquine is a viable course of action, that taking this anti-malaria drug as a preventative measure for COVID-19, that's something people should do, or that it's a valid treatment, is just one way Trump has of positioning himself as the only authority on the subject, because you won't get other authorities willing to tell you that advice. So Trump is cementing himself as the only person willing to stand up for something. He's making himself special to his followers and making them need him and need to keep up with that emotional rut that they're stuck in of saying everybody's lying to us except for Trump. The mainstream media are lying, doctors are lying, nurses are lying. This is the treatment that will keep me safe, and Trump is my only pathway to the truth. Hi, Brian. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me again. I actually went and pulled out my my actual drug book. I don't know if I show this to you.
Thank you. I haven't seen it before.
Yeah, it's something I used back during nursing school, but I've held on to it. So I was looking up hydroxychloroquine, which is known as Plaquenil, which is used for a number of different things. Lupus patients, malaria treatment, all that kind of stuff. But I was trying to find the contraindications. See, there's contraindications for it as well.
Yes, like heart conditions, because it can induce arrhythmias and tachycardias, which are when the electrical impulses that govern how fast your heart beats, or the rhythm of your heartbeat, I think, becomes dysfunctional. And we really need that regularity, because it's like rowing in a boat. You need everybody in a boat to row in a rhythmic fashion to get that boat to move at the speed it needs to go to win a race. And disrupting that electrical impulse that governs your heart is like tying a gag around the guy who tells rowers when to pull together, the conductor of the rowers, and you get a bunch of muscles moving in a fashion that makes blood pumping not functional anymore. You don't get blood pumped out as effectively, so your circulation can't keep up with the needs of your body.
Yeah, so here's some of the adverse reactions. I'll hit the heavy ones are the ones that they print in red, so they want us to know those a lot. Seizures is one that I haven't seen mentioned hardly anywhere.
Okay, seizures,
yeah. And a special type of anemia, an aplastic anemia, a granulocytotopic cytotosis, aplastic anemia.
Okay. So this drug is
associated up the root of that word to see what that is.
Oh, and this is contraindication. So this is not side effects. Sorry, this is if you have these conditions, don't take
it. These are adverse reactions and side effects.
Okay.
Adverse reactions are written in red, like I was saying.
Oh, yes.
And then side effects, the list of side effects, I mean, I could sit here and read these for half the day. Everything from anxiety to headaches, fatigue, psychosis, ototoxicity, which is retinal damage, tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears, visual disturbances, EKG changes, hypotension, abdominal cramps, anorexia, diarrhea, epigastric discomfort, nausea, vomiting, hepatic failure, which they don't even list as a like adverse reaction. That's just listed as a side effect. Bleaching of hair, I guess if you want blonde hair, I don't know. Or alopecia, so maybe your bleached blonde hair will fall out. I don't know. But these aren't things that happen to everybody. These are just side effects. And that's one thing that some people don't realize about side effects of medications. When you see these drug commercials on TV and they have this laundry list of side effects, when these new drugs are put in trials, they have to list every side effect that they've come across during these trials as something that could possibly happen, because it happened to one person
Yes.
or 5 people, there's a statistical probability that it could happen to more once it is out to market and more people are getting it.
Yes.
So a lot of these things are things to look out for, but the ones that are really scary are, like I said, the ones here are written in red, and anything that has to do with a heart condition, liver failure. It's contraindicated for people with, let's see, previous visual damage. So if you have any type of visual problems already, or retinal problems, I would say like cataracts, maybe even glaucoma or something like that, probably would not be indicated for somebody like that.
Oh, you have a question here, Brian. Sorry, you won't see it because it's via YouTube. It says aplastic anemia. Is that failure to generate red blood cells? It sounds like it's failure to generate red blood cells.
Believe so. I'd have to look it up though, because I'm not 100% familiar with all the anemias. Let's see real quick.
Yeah, let's look it up.
Yeah.
We've got computers. We can answer that question for everybody. Aplastic anemia.
Autoimmune disease body fails to produce red blood cells in sufficient numbers. Yes, that's aplastic anemia. Okay.
Okay, good.
I thought it was, but I didn't want to say yes because I didn't want to be wrong.
That's good. That shows you don't have oppositional defiant disorder or malignant narcissism, meaning that you just agree to whatever people will believe.
Yeah.
So you always run with saying yes to things or saying that you're right with a feigned sense of conviction, because you're just trying to increase that number of things you say yes to that you act confident about, because you are doing a malignant trade-off on people's attraction to confidence, dynamism, and purpose.
Yes. And some things it does say here, like lab test considerations for people that are taking it, to continually monitor your complete blood count, which is going to show if you have that aplastic anemia developing. Platelet count as well, because that can lead to bleeding problems. Let's see. Periodically throughout therapy, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's not a drug for everybody. I mean, it's used for specific reasons. It's used for malaria. It's used for rheumatoid arthritis. It's used for lupus patients. But you can't just, like the president's saying, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is you kill a bunch of people needlessly by giving them a drug that their body couldn't handle.
Correct. And Rudy Giuliani is promoting it as well. So the thing about Trump is he's got a cascading effect. He says something and people underneath him take on board that idea of, I can't be sued for saying something that the president has said. I think that's one way in which Fox also lies a lot, thinking that they're under the protection of an all-powerful man who is on a daily basis, usurping more power to the executive branch.
Yes.
And rendering the checks and balances, the powers of the other branches, obsolete by not cooperating with them, which gives him more power. If he doesn't have to cooperate with oversight, he's more powerful. So he can make these false pronouncements, and then the ecosystem, the supporting ecosystem of Fox News characters and Rudy Giuliani can say that. So I just want to play people a little bit of Rudy Giuliani saying something cuckoo from recollection.
Yeah, I haven't even seen this yet.
Yeah, let's have a look. It's 15 seconds long, so not too
trying
bad.
to encourage them.
Yeah.
I think this situation, however, on hydroxyquinoline is a terrible, terrible mistake. If it deprives one person of the medicine and that person dies, it's a terrible mistake. Trying to encourage them.
Yeah.
So,
I think this
hang on, I'll
situation,
just pause
however,
that.
on hydroxyquinoline is a
Terrible mistake.
terrible.
So I want to talk about that in a political context, because from what I can see, that's the fascist divergence from reality that I was arguing about before. Trump is giving his followers something to maintain their outrage about. It's a confected outrage, it's made up, but now they are allowed to be outraged that the doctors and scientists and Democratic governors aren't letting them take hydroxyquinoline. Am I saying it the way Rudy Giuliani said it now? I am. So I'll ignore Rudy Giuliani, say hydroxychloroquine, because there could be many deaths resulting from the side effects that you described or the contraindications. The fact that if you have already a destabilized heart rhythm, you definitely shouldn't further destabilize it with this malaria drug or anti-malaria drug. And Rudy Giuliani is putting it as if there's no side effects, that it's so terrible that Fox News viewers could be deprived of a chance to access this wonder snake oil drug.
All right. I mean, yeah, he's using it as more like fire to the or flames or fanning the fire of the Republicans.
Yes.
It's just getting them more in a frenzy, not stating, like you said, not stating any of the side effects of it. I mean, all medications have side effects. Tylenol has side effects, I mean, but people take that all the time.
Yes.
We in the hospital don't give it to patients if they can't absorb it, or if they have underlying conditions that rule them out from having it. They can even have Tylenol. I mean, there are certain drugs that people just can't take. But the way that he's making it look like, oh, well, if we save one life, well, yeah, it could save one life. I mean, you could get a fluke. That's the thing, that there's no research. There's not enough research out there. And the one research study that Trump keeps pointing to from that French doctor,
Dr. Didier Raoult, who's like a climate change denying guy he was forbidden to publish in the American Journals of Microbiology. So he was excluded from doing that because of previous flaws in his research or misconduct, scientific misconduct.
He is the Trump of the medical world.
Yes, Trump of the medical world, he is. And that framing that Rudy Giuliani is using to pretend that there's no potential contraindications or side effects, as if it's just a blank slate. So that Trumpism of what have you got to lose? Take the medication, is encouraging Fox News viewers and Trump supporters to stay in a frenzy of opposition to media, opposition to good governance. It's like, ignore experts, ignore the reason for science, take any concerns you've ever had in your life that things are too ponderous, that there's too much red tape, that bureaucracy exists, that laws exist. You know, Americans who are too drunk on that idea of freedom and pursuit of whatever they want without restraints. So these are the type of people that have intellectually discarded and discounted the principles of science, the principles of caution, of saying, no, test the snake oil before you sell it to people. Test it to a lot of people, have a control arm so you can measure whether it's a placebo effect of people saying, no, this snake oil's made my hair luxuriant with no side effects. Science is so we can test and separate the snake oil from the actual products, and then also Tylenol, and then also determine under what conditions to take Tylenol. So Trumpism has flourished on that idea of gray is terrible. We must pronounce everything black and white and proceed full pelt. So 9/11 happened. We should ban all Muslims from America going forwards. He's capitalized on that building up of impatience in the psyche of the type of Americans who glorify freedom, guns, a biblical text from thousands of years ago, and Fox News.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to think how to put this. I don't know I don't know that anybody could explain it to him. I don't know if you saw any of his presser today or have heard anything. Basically, somebody tried to ask Dr. what's his Fauci? How do you say his name?
Fauci. Yeah, Fauci.
Yeah, it is Fauci. Dr. Fauci. Basically the same question to Trump, or that Trump had been trying to say over and over and over, but about side effects of the medication, and Trump cut it off and said, "Hey, I've already answered this 15 times." Like he's not even letting the doctor, who is a medical professional, answer questions.
Yes.
And then we have all this outrage about people saying fire Fauci Fauci today.
Fire Fauci.
Fauci.
Yeah, that's a bot. That's a bot move, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a bot
Russian
move
pumped.
because if you look at it, and that's what a lot of people are saying is, look at the time it is in Moscow right now.
Yeah,
that's when all of this hashtag started trending.
Yeah. We have a breaking news comment from one of our viewers who says Zuckerberg announced he's backing the RNC.
Yes.
So in a way, nice that he's being open about it, because he's been covertly backing Trump and Russia for a long time. So it's maybe good for people to know so that they can get off that platform or have an additional platform motivation, to delete Facebook. It's very important. I will put this comment up for a second because it is nice to have some appreciation. Check it out, Brian. Someone appreciates what we're saying. Always good. Thank you, people. Yes.
Thank you, Barry.
A comment from YouTube points out that Giuliani was confusing hydrochloroquine and fluoroquinolone. So that's where we got his pronunciation of hydroxyquinolone, I think.
Quinolone. Okay.
That's an assertion. So makes sense.
That might be, yeah.
And he's also pointed out that Peter Navarro, who's presumably head of something Trump economics, is he Commerce Secretary, something, to non-physician enthusiasts for hydrochloroquine. Is it hydrochloroquine or hydroxychloroquine? Anyway,
hydrochloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. They're two different medications.
Okay.
Hydroxychloroquine is the one that is more used for lupus. Hydrochloroquine is the one that is more related to a fish tank cleaner, and it's mainly for malaria.
Oh, okay. So chloroquine phosphate is also
hydrochloroquine. Phosphate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's the fish tank cleaner and a malaria drug. And the hydroxychloroquine and hydroxychloroquine is something also used potentially in combination with an antibacterial.
It sounds like it has more oxygen molecules in it or something.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll take that comment down. We don't mind people suggesting that, because I can see how Trumpism is a backlash against the carefulness of science and the carefulness of a lot of, let's call them wonky people who want to discuss policy, and they want to do it in very careful, measured, considered language. And they often use words that I will say are lexically dense, meaning they have a lot of syllables and they pack a lot of meaning into the one word. And they're great for academics and intellectuals to communicate with each other. But that means leadership is just conducted at that level by people speaking language to each other that only they understand. Trumpism is, to a degree, a reaction to that elitism, that educated people will govern us and we won't understand what they're saying. We won't understand their justifications and their explanations. So Obama was successful, and he was very good at speaking to the people and moderating his language so that he had pauses. People could process what he was saying. It wasn't all this fast talking polysyllabic stuff. But at the same time, Democrats do still often talk in wonkish language about the benefits of policy. And I often return to this point that Trumpism feeds on and magnifies any emotional reaction people have, any emotional frustration people have with not understanding the language used by leaders. So when people say Trump tells it like it is and we laugh at them for being stupid, I don't want to feed into that dynamic. I want to find a way of being more casual about leadership, breaking down explanations more, having a left-leaning Fox equivalent, not in terms of equivalence of lies and lack of devotion to truth, but in terms of meeting people's emotional needs for reassurance and simplicity, and not false reassurance, but just the reassurance of engaging with the truth. So I think Andrew Cuomo is receiving a lot of plaudits at the moment for speaking to people in a really accessible way. And that's one of the goals of this broadcast, is to try and make these issues accessible to people.
Yeah, and that's very good goals. I think that, like you said, if we had something that was the Fox, the anti-Fox, I guess maybe we could call it, that would help out a lot. But I mean, there's either everybody's more moderate, or you have Fox and the Breitbart and the InfoWars. There are some, I mean, like Occupy Democrats and the Young Turks and stuff like that are way far on the other side. But
Yes,
they're
and they're
not
terrible as
reputable.
well. Yeah,
But
we need reputable people.
Yeah, they're not reputable.
I want
mean,
to break that mold of
Yeah.
intelligent people and well-meaning people being drawn to a pathway of leadership that means learning a lot, reading a lot, but learning to communicate only in a very not archaic, a very meaning-dense way.
Yeah, more academic, but not over people's heads.
Yes.
And more truthful and more factual.
Yes, and even just more playful, because some people respond to that playfulness. It is often powerful when you don't conform and you break out of the mold. Somebody, and I haven't read this article, someone was saying C students are often successful, or at least more successful than people would assume, because when you've graded people, you're like, yes, A students, you're going to succeed, go off and succeed. But sometimes they're just hard workers and not flexible thinking. They've just got lots of crystalline intelligence, but not lots of fluid intelligence. So if Trumpism is part of embracing that fluidity, then we can say, hey, let's find more fluidity in ourselves to bring to people without having to embrace the criminal corruption of a Trump and Trumpism. So I want to meet people's hunger in ways that are healthy. And yes.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to go back to something that Paul had asked a little bit ago. As far as ibuprofen, Paul, I've heard that it's not good to take. I don't know the science behind it. I know in a hospital setting, very few hospitals actually give ibuprofen during hospitalizations. It's typically Tylenol. So I don't know how much research there is in that in the actual hospital setting.
Oh, so I was reading the comments for a section, Brian. I'm not quite up to speed with what you're saying. Were you talking about that recommendation that people concerned that they have COVID symptoms but haven't received a test result should avoid ibuprofen? Was that what you were talking about, or something?
Yeah,
else?
Paul asked. He said he wanted to know. There's been a lot of chatter saying ibuprofen is not good to take for the virus. He asked me if that was true. So, like I was saying, I don't know the research behind it. I don't know that there's a lot of research yet. But if people are already saying not to take ibuprofen, I actually went out and bought some Tylenol, which I normally don't have in my house. I normally have ibuprofen and use that for everything. So now we have Tylenol.
That's actually a good example of what I was talking about in terms of flexibility and not waiting for the burden of evidence. So people who like Trump and go, yeah, he doesn't wait for proof, he just goes with his gut. That's one end of the continuum, and the other end is being really exact and measured and saying, well, we won't tell you yet if ibuprofen is contraindicated for COVID-19 yet because we don't have adequate proof. But people say, we still want you to tell us on the balance of indications yet, what would you advise if it's, no harm to go without ibuprofen? Would you tell us to err on the balance of caution and not take ibuprofen? And I think I wouldn't take ibuprofen out of an abundance of caution at this point, but I would also acknowledge that there is no evidence yet, robust evidence to say that you should avoid ibuprofen.
And I would say based on what little bit of information we have, I would say not to take ibuprofen at this point if you can avoid it. I know Tylenol sometimes doesn't work as well for people. People that have liver function problems, they're not supposed to take Tylenol. I mean, if it's the only thing you can take, I mean, can you do without it type thing? I mean, that's kind of what I would say to that. But I wouldn't. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a research person, so I can't say one way or another. But erring on the side of caution is always better than not.
I'm trying to look up some information now. So people are going online with evolving information because we are getting updated information about COVID-19 as people do more research. So I was just trying to use the word, when I Google a question like that, I put the word evidence in. Putting the word evidence in really streamlines your Google searches. So here we go. Let's see, I think I found a Nope, March the 21st is too old a document. I want something even more useful than that, more recent. So no clinical trials were identified assessing the safety of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, such as ibuprofen, in managing the symptoms of COVID-19. Overall, similar safety profiles were demonstrated for ibuprofen and paracetamol in treating symptoms of colds and flus. So that's just generally in relation to colds and flus. WHO initially recommended to avoid ibuprofen as self-medication unless it was prescribed by healthcare officials. However, it has since retracted the initial recommendation and states that WHO does not recommend against the use of ibuprofen based on current published clinical or population-based data. But that's, they're in a position of extreme power. They don't want to tell people not to take ibuprofen and punish ibuprofen-producing companies when there isn't strong clinical evidence to suggest one way or the other. But yes.
I'm looking at an article as well.
Oh, yep. What have you found, Brian?
It's a health article at Harvard. I'm just kind of skimming through it to see if I see anything.
So if you're already taking the advice from health authorities that I'm seeing is to if you're already taking ibuprofen because you've been prescribed that by a doctor, to continue taking it. Canada's Public Health Agency has recommended both paracetamol and ibuprofen be used to treat fever for people in isolation. But again, they're basically just still saying that there's a lack of evidence evaluating the safety of ibuprofen. And the evidence is inconclusive. No evidence suggesting additional harms in managing symptoms of upper respiratory infections when compared to paracetamol. So how far do we go in exercising an abundance of caution because of a potential whisper, a rumor of concerns about ibuprofen?
Yeah, I'm looking, this article that I'm looking at from Harvard Medical, I lost it. I scrolled too fast. Yeah. It's basically saying that, I guess there was a report from some French doctors. Here it is. Some French doctors advised against using ibuprofen, which is Motrin, Advil, or many generic versions for COVID-19 symptoms based on reports of otherwise healthy people with confirmed COVID-19 who were taking an NSAID for symptoms relief and developed a severe illness, especially pneumonia. These are the only observations and not based on scientific studies. The WHO initially recommended using acetaminophen instead of ibuprofen to help reduce fever and aches and pains related to the coronavirus infection, but now states that either acetaminophen or ibuprofen can be used. Rapid changes in recommendations create uncertainty. Since some doctors remain concerned about NSAIDs, it still seems prudent to choose acetaminophen first. While the total dose not exceeding 3,000 milligrams per day. That's standard. You don't want to have any more than 3,000 milligrams in a day. It can actually cause liver damage at that point. Yeah. So basically, this is saying either or, but they're saying that the first line is still acetaminophen.
Yes. And so someone who works as a hospital transcriptionist was saying that ER doctors that he works with or she works with are still instructing discharged patients to take Tylenol alternating with ibuprofen. But again, that might not be the most up-to-date position. Is that what you're saying is happening currently? Dear commentator person, what's your name? Pompeius Magnus. How very Roman of you. This is a good point, though, because someone's asking about Avigan, which is the commercial name for a product whose pharmaceutical name is Favipiravir, which is an antiviral medication, I think. What is it? An anti-flu drug. Japan is considering increasing its stockpile of it, hoping to triple production of the drug from current levels. So we've seen now that some people just run with hopefulness that from commercial considerations. So Trump mentions a drug positively, production increases of that drug, even without an evidentiary basis to do so, just without a robust evidentiary basis. Just because Trump promoting something and Fox News promoting something means there will be a market to sell that medication, to sell more hydroxychloroquine. But Trump hasn't positively referred to Avigan as far as I know of yet. He probably doesn't have any secret investments in it or hasn't told his family to go out and secretly invest in this drug yet. So he's not personally commercially motivated to promote it. But there possibly is an emerging evidentiary basis for this drug. Let's have a look. I will share with you the article that I'm looking at. We'll remove Rudy Giuliani, and I will bring it up here.
Yeah, this one article I'm looking at real quick, just before you say anything,
Yes.
saying that the Agravan is to enter phase 3 of trials in Japan already.
Yeah.
So they've evidently been testing this long enough that they're in phase 3 of trials, which is quite a long ways away already.
Yeah, and to even get to stage 3, you have to successfully pass through with promise stages 1 and 2, as far as I understand. So that is sounding then much more promising than trials conducted by one rogue French doctor and his data that he's putting out in an incomplete fashion in trials, whilst getting his lawyer business partner friend to contact Fox News and promote segments about it there. So that's much more dodgy with the hydroxychloroquine. This is potentially promising. How many more trials are there after stage 3? I wonder how many.
Stage 3 is typically the end. Stage 3 is typically when they are doing placebo versus the drug. When they're doing double-blind studies to see what the effectiveness is. And I know this because I was in a double-blind stage 3 study for another medication a couple years ago.
I was like, wow, nursing education is so good with its pharmaceutical components. But okay, you were literally in a stage 3 trial. That's cool.
I was literally in a part of a straight stage 3 trial, and now I'm in, I guess they can kind of consider it a stage 4 of the trial, where it's long-term patients that are on the medication.
Okay, so a longitudinal study, just checking to make sure there's no
long-term side effects.
No long-term side effects. Well, that's promising.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that is exciting. In the interim, because we're in peak danger period for Americans at the moment. New York hasn't hit its peak yet, I think Cuomo was saying, but so they're still probably significantly short on ventilators, and Trump is still telling people things at his briefings that downplay the need for ventilators because he wants to minimize criticism, presumably, of himself in not using the Defense Production Act, not activating it 70 days ago, and still not effectively evoking it now to organize the mass production of ventilators to meet the needs of people's parents, people's mothers and fathers and uncles and sisters and brothers, people's doctors, people's nurses. A proportion of infected people will get severe cases, and a proportion of those severe cases will need external breathing assistance in the form of ventilation, in the form of use of ventilators. And yes, potentially a lot of those people in serious conditions who use ventilators still won't make it. But without the ventilators, those people will have no treatment possibilities, and those people will all definitely die. So it's about 20% of infected people have a serious case. And what percentage of those severe cases need ventilation? Is it about half of severe cases need ventilation? I can't remember at this point.
I'm not sure what the numbers are on that. I know that, if somebody's coming in at this point, most hospitals are bypassing any other type of ventilation. I think we spoke about that earlier, like positive pressure ventilation, and going straight to intubation. So I think just that in and of itself has increased the demand for ventilators because we're bypassing all other less invasive methods for staff safety. For the protection of the doctors and the nurses.
Yeah. My Roman named commentator from before says her reports about ER doctors are always current. Okay, so you're telling us then it's current that ER doctors in your place of work are still prescribing that people go home and treat fevers with alternating paracetamol and ibuprofen. So that's interesting. And I guess they're following those WHO recommendations or just the general level of evidence that says there's nothing to say that ibuprofen is contraindicated in relation to COVID-19 patients. So
yeah.
I take that on board.
And it could be from that group of French doctors that were saying this initially. This is, I mean, a lot of times you get knee-jerk reactions with stuff like this as well too, because we're still learning so much about this disease. There's still so much we don't know. We don't have effective treatments for it. We don't know how long it's going to be before we can get it under control, because it is such a novel virus, and because people don't have immunity to it, and it's hitting people hard. So I think that, I mean, part of that reaction to like the ibuprofen was like, oh God, it's bad. Nobody used ibuprofen. And then now with a little bit more time and research, you're saying, oh no, it's okay.
Yes, we are. Because of the heightened anxiety, we're impatient for definite knowledge when definite knowledge may not be available yet. So people are prepared to jump the gun, but Trump supporters seem to be particularly emotionally liable to a desire for jumping the gun, because he's promised that to them over and over again. He's promised that he is the type of leader who will always have a vision as to what the right thing is to do and then do that. And they've convinced themselves that that's a very sensible approach, to not wait for evidence or to just proceed ahead on the basis of Trump's gut. And they're also working with a false conviction that Trump was a successful businessman. And I'm going to say it's a mutually supportive process. They've trained themselves. Trump has assisted and participated in that training. Fox News has also helped to intellectually condition people to accept mythology about Trump, to overlook his multiple business failures and business bankruptcies, and to overlook revelations of his misconduct with journalists, which is very important. It's very important to know of Trump's origin story, that he was only able to obtain loans and to stay afloat at all during the 1980s because he tricked journalists and blackmailed journalists. He blackmailed Forbes magazine to minimize their reporting of his degree of debt. And through that trickery, through concealing from people, by getting one journalist fired and so deterring, because getting somebody fired is a significant deterrence for other people speaking up. And he's using that technique now with the media. Now he just tries to use public opposition in a way to silence and muzzle journalists. But he used that technique in the 80s to muzzle Forbes and to just change their reporting. So Forbes still reported on Trump, but instead of having in their headline how many billions he was in debt, or their approximation of how many $1 billion in debt he was, they got the story to just lead with a far more innocuous, how much in debt is Trump? And that's a rhetorical question. It doesn't break the scandal. And I obtained that information from reading an article that I will share with people. I always share it. It's a very, very valuable resource for everybody to have, because it's been shown with Trump supporters that the type of information that's most likely to help them change their mind about Trump, or at least this was previously the case. Now in coronavirus, it might have changed. But previously to the pandemic, the most potent way to change a Trump supporter's mind was to give them access to information about how he was not a self-made man. And that was like apparently taking away some of the foundational blocks of their convictions that he was a good person and a good leader and a success.
Yeah,
so
one of the best resources, not even a resource, one of the best things, most comprehensive resources I found on Trump is actually a podcast called Trump Inc. Put out by a bunch of people. I think they probably have 50 episodes by now. But if you listen to just like the first 10 episodes, and they're anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour long, they go back through the history of Trump and all of his dealings. And I know that the whole Australia thing was there with the casino in one of the episodes. All of his mob ties. They've dug up a lot of information, a very thorough, very professional, very professionally put together podcast as well. I've actually turned a couple friends of mine onto that, and they were surprised. They were like, "Well, we knew Trump was horrible, but we didn't realize he was this horrible."
Yes.
After listening to just a couple episodes, and they are it's an independent group of people that started this. I think they have some backing, some funding now, but it's almost like information overload when you hear all of the dealings, all of the lawsuits, all of the I mean, there's some stuff in there about his divorces, and there's stuff in there about bad business deals and the bankrupted casinos, and how they were basically just fronts for money laundering for the mob.
Yes. Yes.
Is essentially what they were. People don't know all this stuff. People see him from The Apprentice and they think, "Oh yeah, this guy's great."
Yes. All right, I put that up on screen as your recommendation, Brian, and I'll try and get onto that as well. Although I know that after Mueller, the end of Mueller's investigation, I found that I'd reached capacity to learn more about how terrible Trump was, because I'd already heard about his white collar crime to such an extent that it became incredibly distressing for me that Mueller couldn't be more direct with communicating to people some of the evidentiary basis that exists for questioning this man's authority and this man's legitimacy in office. And Mueller had to be all Republican and cautious about it and say, yep, I'm going to be bound by this Office of Office of the OSU, the Office of Special Counsel, that their ruling from 1973, not ruling, sorry, their advisory memo from 1973 saying don't criminally prosecute a president in office. And that Mueller went, okay, I'm bound by that, so I can't criminally prosecute the president, whether he has or hasn't committed any crime, and I can't intimate that I would or wouldn't prosecute him, because that's not fair. That's putting him on trial in the public arena when I can't literally put him on trial because I'm bound by the Office of Legal Counsel's advisory memo. And that was such a gut punch to me that it's made me struggle to engage with any more evidence of Trump's criminality. I'm like, I don't need to know any more about this. I've got so much detail. My job now is to maybe just distill a tiny bit of it. So I guess when I'm emotionally ready, I'll go back to Trump Inc. But in the meantime, I've got all of this misconduct and malfeasance to deal with now that is literally killing people. So if Mueller had been able to be more direct about Trump's activities in relation to lying to the American public about his deals with Russia, if Mueller had been able to go more deep into Trump's financial information, and if Trump had cooperated more, which isn't that surprising. The criminal did not cooperate with the investigation, and people associated and allied with him who wanted to maintain his illicit grasp on power, his kleptocracy, as it were, also didn't cooperate. So it was hard to use the existing legal structures of America, the existing systems of checks and balances on criminality and on misconduct in government, to hold that man to account and to remove him from office before he could kill millions of Americans and potentially millions of people around the world by approaching a pandemic in a way that purely benefited himself, in a way that was purely to minimize electoral risk to himself, rather than legitimately address the needs of the American people to have a workable economy and to have a surviving population that didn't lose decades of their lives to avoidable death certificates, to avoidable death statistics. Unfortunate. And I cried about it the other day because I just told my husband, I said, I feel like I've failed in that I've been broadcasting for 2 years, trying to bring people on board, trying to make some of this information accessible, in the hope that he could be ousted from office before murdering, but before being complicit in the unnecessary deaths of millions of people. And the trajectory suggests that millions of people may die at this point. And I just had this moment of connecting with my grief about that. And it's always good to get it out sometimes if you're in a safe place where you can express your emotions. I just went, wow, I'm really sad that I failed. And it's not like failure just belongs to me. I'm not taking that all on board for myself, but just personally to know that my goal for myself was to be part of a movement to bring truth about Trump to enough people, to motivate enough Republicans to act in the interests of the American public, and to at least have witnesses at his trial, to at least do even that bare minimum. And I couldn't succeed. And I'm glad I had that moment of just being able to acknowledge my own grief and sadness about that, because there is a lot of emotions for everyone to process right now. We have anticipatory grief, which means we're looking around us and going, we're on a graph, we're on a slope. Many people are in denial about it. There's 8 Republican senators, I think, still denying that it's a problem worthy of a lockdown situation. But for the rest of us, we're looking at that situation and going, people are going to die, hospitals are going to be stretched, and people who have other conditions, as you were saying the other day, secondary conditions, people who have appendicitis, who won't get operated on. Doctors are seeing an increase in gangrenous conditions because of the necessary postponement of elective surgery.
And gangrene can actually kill people.
Yes.
It can cause people to go septic and they can die from that.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, gangrene, you just cut it off. No, if you don't cut it off in time, it will kill people.
Yes. So people might not understand that the number of avoidable deaths that aren't directly COVID-19, but that may occur as a consequence of COVID-19 patients, of pandemic level of patients overwhelming hospital systems, may even surpass the direct number of COVID-19 deaths. Following the Ebola outbreak, a lot of pregnant women died in labor in African countries where Ebola was a significant problem. So I don't know exactly how likely it is for secondary deaths to supersede the actual direct count of COVID-19 deaths, but it could potentially.
Yeah, I saw a tweet. I want to say it was Molly Jong-Fast that put it out. I'm pretty sure it was her, saying that they've had a rise in the number of deaths in New York City at home, where normally the statistics were like between 20 and maybe 27 a day people would die in their homes. They're having 200 people a day die in their homes.
No.
And those aren't being related to COVID. I'm sure a certain percentage of those people are.
No.
I wouldn't say 100%. I wouldn't even go as far as to say 75%. But I would say a good percentage of those people, 60 to 70%, are probably positive COVID patients that are dying just in their home because they're either afraid to seek treatment or they can't seek treatment because maybe they're the only person. They just end up dying in their own bed.
Yes.
You never know.
Well, that's one way in which scholars study the effects of authoritarian leaders, is to study departures from norms. So the departures from normal death rates, and to say, okay, but how many people died during this period where an authoritarian leader was in power? So if Stalin caused millions of Ukrainian people to die by inducing a famine, what was the departure from the death statistics that they would normally experience over the course of a month or a year? And so with Trumpism, I hope that there are people out there, even now, researchers, looking at well, you said there was some, and Molly might have retweeted it. I'll see if we can find it now, that people might normally die at a rate of 17 to 20 in their homes a day. But now that rate has significantly increased, and we can blame Trumpism insofar as it let the virus rampage in an uncontrolled fashion throughout America because of Trump's failure to issue lockdown orders, a federal lockdown order earlier, or indeed even at all, and failure of Trumpism to appropriately send out supplies from the National Strategic Stockpile. The failure of Trump, he let the contract lapse for maintenance of the supplies in the National Strategic Stockpile, leading to broken ventilators. So California's been sent broken ventilators, and for Trump for withholding supplies from states because he needs to intimidate their governors into not criticizing him and not contributing to electoral risks for him in November.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through Molly's timeline here, and I'm not seeing it, but she tweets so much in a given day.
Yeah.
It's hard to find any one specific thing from her. I wish I had bookmarked that. I didn't think about it at the time.
That's what you and I are working on cultivating, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not seeing it, and it might not have been her. I'm not sure. Like I said, I mean, it's something I would expect from her, though.
Yes.
Just because I've been following her for quite a long time now.
I've been searching on Twitter. Okay. And also I'll share it with people because this does seem to be an interesting statistic. Let's have a look. Oops, not that one. Nope. I just used the Twitter search bar to Google the term departure and death. So someone said it feels like a very under-discussed story how well Washington state is doing compared to the rest of America. Part of it is that they were first, but not all of it. Nobody seems to be on their trajectory except maybe California. Interesting. So maybe we should look at what measures were imposed by Washington state. They were early. Somebody says beyond his sadness for loss of life, he's not really interested in death rates at this stage, except as a marker of total contagion and maybe as a departure from the established rate for the elderly and compromised. All right, so maybe that will give me a clue as to something else I can Google. Departure from established rate of death. Morbidity rate, perhaps. Morbidity is defined as any departure, objective and subjective. Okay, nope, that's not true. I was reading, you know how when you Google something and you get to read part of it, there's a ... and more.
Yeah.
So rule out what I just said. Morbidity rate is the frequency or proportion with which a disease appears in the population.
Yeah, morbidity and mortality are two different things. People get them confused.
Yes. So morbidity rates, but here it's got two different things. Okay, no, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, defines morbidity as any departure, subjective or objective, from a state of physiological or psychological well-being. Oh, so that comprises disease, injury, and disability.
Yes.
So the proportion of initial cases of a disease to a population is an incidence rate. We're all going to be learning all these new terms. But yes, so I don't know then what the prevalence rate is as opposed to morbidity incidence rate. So incidence is the proportion of initial cases of a disease is the incidence rate. I need some examples to help me process this. Okay, if 50,000 new cases of heart disease developed in a city with a population of 5 million in 1 year, the morbidity or incidence rate is then 1%. If 250,000 people already suffer from heart disease in the city, the prevalence rate increases from 5 to 6%. Okay, that's helping me get my head around it. So I'm going to bring that up on the screen so that other people can see it if that's useful at all. All right. So this is from an investment publication called Investopedia, but they're still using quotes from the CDC, so I'm working with that. So I'll highlight the bit that I'm saying. So to have an example, new cases of heart disease gives you the incidence rate. And 50,000 is an increase on 250,000. So you've got to calculate that. So the prevalence rate of heart disease in the community has increased from 5 to 6% if it's, so we're relating 50,000 to 250,000 there, and also relating it to 5 million. Okay, because 50,000 is 1%. Okay, so 50,000 is 1% of the population. So the prevalence rates increased by 1% from 5 to 6%. Okay. Well, we didn't have any pre-existing prevalence of COVID-19. It's all new. So incidence is similar to the morbidity and incidence rate is the same as the prevalence rate at this point because it's a novel disease to which we have no pre-existing immunity. All right. Well, now we've learned something. Oh, is there a new thing now? Twitter Live is new for us that have used Periscope for 5 years. Am I using Twitter Live now? That's interesting. Athe Cat is feeling disheartened, which is fair. I tell you what is supposed to help with being disheartened is action. So participate in this broadcast. Listen to the tips that we sometimes put out. Brian and I sometimes have suggestions about writing to your senators, but not only that, taking a picture of your letter, blanking out your name and sharing that on social media, because people are monkeys. We have mirror neurons in our brains that facilitates action on our part when we see somebody else do something. We are like mirrors, we copy each other. And good actions are as contagious as people coalescing around a stupid idea. People coalesce around strong ideas, be they good or bad. So if you can write to a senator or a mayor or a governor and say, my state needs a shutdown order because proactive responses to this pandemic are more effective than reactive responses. So you say, I need the leadership of my town, state, country to do the most effective thing, which has the better long-term implications for our economy and our communities and our lives. What do you want, Papa? Did you? Well, it's going to be lunchtime soon. Did you see the snacks that Mummy put on the table for you? Mummy put them on the table. Some chopped up apple and some mini muffins from yesterday that we made. Made white chocolate and raspberry muffins yesterday, everybody. I just had to tell you. They were so good.
Mommy, where's the container where the muffins are in?
2 plates with the muffins just on the table. Oh, you want to get more from a container. Does that mean you ate those muffins and you're coming back for more? I'll make you a sandwich in a minute.
No, I want the muffins.
Well, you go look in the kitchen. They're in a lunchbox. In a lunchbox, yeah. Okay, Athe Cat very promisingly says, you're right, I will do that. I've been speaking with Mayor on social media, but not written letter. Yes, written letters are great because stepping up concern levels and just being visible with those letters. So social media is good because people can see your comments, but they don't always take it as seriously as a written letter. So you can also record yourself making a phone call and then share that call, because what we need are scripts. People often lack confidence in expressing themselves. And when we see or hear the example of someone else speaking up, that amplifies the power of your voice. Remember, we copy each other doing good things. So I'm trying to minimize the amount of time I spend condemning people doing the wrong things, because I need a balance of condemning misconduct and criminality, which is terrible, but also applauding, supporting, and copying good things that people are doing. Because there's so much we need to do now in the absence of a benign federal government. We have a literally malevolent federal government at this point. And even the people who trust Trump are still being massively betrayed by him, and their rural hospitals will still get overrun, even if he gives them a disproportionately unfair share of supplies from the strategic stockpile. And they go, yay, I'm getting more than the blue states. Even if that's how they feel, ultimately, they're still being betrayed. Their family members are still likely to sicken and potentially some of them die. And communities suffer massively from the economic fallout, not just of the suppressive measures. People talk about the economy being hurt by the shutdown, but the economy is going to be hurt in 2 ways. The suppressive measures, which are also protective of the economy in the long term, just short-term pain. But the economy is also going to be hurt by the large numbers of dead people. That is a significant drain on an economy when you don't have as many people to buy things and to sell things to. And when you have millions of people are grieving and afraid. So suppressive measures that reduce that fear and grief and death are more beneficial for the economy in a month's time.
Yeah, and that seems to be, I mean, if you listen to Trump, it's almost like he bought stock in this medication and that's why he's trying to push it, honestly. I mean, he is more focused on getting the economy back. He's more focused on, putting a date, okay, after Easter. And now that's kind of like, maybe not after Easter, or maybe for Easter was what he was saying before. And now it's kind of being pushed back.
But I want to change your framing, Brian. I want to change your framing, because when we say, and we all do this, say, oh, Trump's focused on trying to get the economy back, I would change that and say Trump's focused on appearing as if he's trying to get the economy back.
Okay, true. You're right.
He's probably actually getting advice saying the economy will do worse if you reopen it. The economy will do worse if you end the suppressive measures, because they don't just protect lives, they protect the economy in the long run as well. Because death, grief, and devastation are bad for economies. Suppressive measures are bad for the economy very obviously when the deaths haven't started to happen yet, because they're to prevent death. But once the deaths happen anyway, and you're still going to get a high level of deaths, even with the suppression measures that are being implemented now, one, because they're being implemented inadequately and Republican governors aren't doing it, or 8 Republican governors aren't doing it, but 2, just the disease is already likely at a high level of community spread across the US. So the economy is going to take that hit. So I want us to take care and try and set for ourselves a task of referring to Trump not as protecting the economy, but taking steps to signal to his supporters that he cares about the economy. We need to phrase things in a way that acknowledges fascism, or leaders like Trump do things for optics, and they don't really care whether or not they're effective, because their supporters don't really care either, because they don't accept evidence anymore. So you can tell them the economy is doing wonderfully when it's not. And they are so drunk on fascism, and drunk because they're stuck in that box of not being able to admit that they were wrong, that it doesn't matter. They can be like people in post-Hitler's Germany who said, oh no, Hitler was good, even as they're carrying a lost amputated leg from the war that Hitler caused to come about.
Yeah, and I see exactly what you're saying there. He's trying to appear to prop things up when he's not really, he can't, for one, and what he would try and do wouldn't be effective, and it's just going to kill more people, even if he did do it. But I don't.
He's characterizing himself as a savior of the economy, because Republicans always do that. They characterize themselves as saviors of the economy, as people who are sympathetic to business interests, but they always ruin the economy, and they always create more debt. And
we've said that numerous times.
But what we do as Democrats is we often say we have to look beyond the economy. We have to look to this social justice issue. And it's like, we've got to take back that language and say, we are the defenders of the economy. We are the true proppers up and supporters of businesses.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's true. That's true. But I don't trust Trump to even listen to anybody. That's the problem. He goes so far out. And I mean, every advisor he's ever had has been fired, and the ones that are still there cower around him like they don't want to be fired. I mean, he just fired the IG. And when I think about it, when it happened the other day, I was like, it's almost like he was trying to do this under the radar, like he thought nobody would notice. Seriously, that is what I think that he thought. I thought he has to be doing this and saying, nobody, if I do this now, there's a pandemic going on. Everybody's worried about that. We're talking about the medications. It's going to get better, blah, blah, blah. If I just fire him, it'll be on the periphery. It'll hit 2 headlines and that'll be it.
Well, Brian, what I'd like to say is that the new strategy for propaganda, the new manifestation of authoritarianism in our age is a revelation that Russians had. You don't just need to suppress news. If you say, I'm going to kill journalists, sometimes that has the Barbara Streisand effect of drawing attention to something you don't want. What Trump benefits from is this propaganda revelation of noise, knowing that you can crowd out the bad things you're doing if you just keep talking and keep generating drama, and you keep feeding into narratives that is easy for people to talk about. So social media and everything else that we have, there's such a proliferation of information that you just create a strong narrative and keep talking about that, even when people are exposing your crimes, even when you're admitting guilt by firing the person who just facilitated a complaint to be made about you. Yes, darling? 1 second. What? You want some chocolate? Didn't you just have some muffins? How about you go get Daddy to chop you up an apple? Okay, Mummy's broadcasting. What was I saying? It was a rant. It was a rant about noise. So that, yes, people are talking about Michael Atkinson being fired. Michael Atkinson wrote a letter about how he had just sought to do his duty, and it's hard to feel, it's hard to not be concerned that the president has fired him for just doing his duty. And this is great. We listen to that. But Trump knows that our hands are still tied because Republicans are still wielding too much power, and their narrative is still holding sway in too many people's minds. So it doesn't even matter anymore. Trump is, people sometimes call him Teflon. And I retract that statement. I don't want to say it doesn't matter anymore, because it does, but we just still need to find ways of talking about him and holding him accountable without staying in our lane. We have to step out of our lane. And if our lane is just to complain that Trump is annoying and bad, without broadening our reach and saying, come on board, everybody, we have some shared values. We don't agree about everything. We can't just say you're canceled, you're Trump voters, or you're Trump leaning independents. Come on board and listen to us for the sake of the country, for the sake of your lives, your communities, your families, your businesses, your homes, your everything. And listen to us that Trump needs to do this. We have to be able to frame it in a way that says Trump is not doing the needed things for America, and he's not doing the needed things for the economy. So we don't say, just limit ourselves to saying, hey, Wall Street, we're not going to lay down our lives for Wall Street. We say, no, the economy is important. And the people who are better at looking after the economy are the people with a track record of economic strength, which is Democrats. I don't know. I'm just brainstorming, and I'm trying to break out of the box that Trump consigns us to all too easily, because he knows how to play narratives. He's a very ignorant person, but he is a strong emotional manipulator.
Yeah, he is. He is a very strong emotional manipulator, and he plays into people's fears. He has always done that. That's what he started. That's how he started campaigning, by playing into people's fears, and that's what got him to where he is now, unfortunately. And people are paying the price, and it's sad. I mean, as a healthcare worker, as a nurse, when I go to work, I want everybody that I take care of that day to go home, and
Yes.
that doesn't happen. And we know that. Going into the shift, we know that there's a possibility that somebody will die that day, that night, or that day, or whenever. But with this pandemic that's going on, it's not one person dying, it's not two people dying, it's not 5 people dying. There are hospitals that are having dozens of deaths a day. That, I mean, they're bringing in refrigerated trucks to remove corpses because their morgues are so full. That they can't process the volume of dead bodies. That, I mean, when a hospital is built, they say, okay, this many beds typically will handle this many deaths within this amount of time, and this is how quickly the bodies are moved out by the funeral homes and stuff like that. So they'll say, okay, we only need a morgue that'll hold 3 bodies, or we only need a morgue that'll hold 16 bodies.